The last thing my wife said before she fell asleep was, "Don't open the door for anyone." I laughed it off. We were parked at a remote campsite in the Ozark National Forest, 43 miles from the nearest town. Nobody was gonna knock on our door. That was the whole point of going off-grid. No neighbors, no noise, no people. I should have listened to her. My name is Derek Callahan. I'm 38 years old, and I've been RV camping for most of my adult life. My father took me out on the road when I was 7, and I've never lost the love for it. There's something about pulling into a quiet site, cutting the engine, and just sitting in the stillness that makes me feel more alive than anything else in the world. My wife, Sandra, came around to it eventually. She wasn't a natural camper, but she trusted me. She trusted my experience. She trusted my judgment. I wish she hadn't. We had been driving since 6 in the morning. It was now almost 11 at night. We'd found a flat pull-off just past mile marker 9 on Forest Road 1003, a gravel road so rarely traveled that grass grew up through the middle of it in a thin green stripe. There was no cell service, there was no camp host, there were no other vehicles anywhere. Just us, our 24-foot travel trailer, and the thick wall of oak and pine that pressed in from every direction. Sandra had gone to bed around 9:30. She was exhausted from the drive, and honestly, so was I. But I had that habit I've never been able to shake, that late night sitting in the quiet hour where I just existed in the dark. I'd pour myself a small glass of whiskey, turn off every light in the trailer, and sit at the dinette table next to the window. I'd watch the dark outside, I'd listen to the forest breathe. That night, the forest wasn't breathing. That was the first thing I noticed. No crickets, no frogs, no wind moving through the leaves. I'd camped enough to know what that meant. Something had disturbed the area. An animal, most likely. A deer, maybe. A coyote passing through. Natural things spooked other natural things, and the silence would return to normal within a few minutes. But it didn't. 20 minutes passed, and the silence held. It was the kind of silence that has weight to it, the kind that presses against your eardrums and makes you hyper-aware of every small sound inside the trailer. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the vent fan, Sandra's slow, even breathing from the bedroom in the back. I pressed my face close to the window and looked out. The moon was up, nearly full, and it cast a pale silver light across the gravel road and the dark shapes of the trees. I could see maybe 30 or 40 feet clearly before the shadows swallowed everything. The tree line was still. Nothing moved. I sat back and took a sip of my whiskey. Then I heard it. A soft crunch of gravel, single step, then nothing. I set my glass down slowly. I told myself it was an animal, a raccoon maybe. They were bold little things and they loved to investigate campsites. I waited. Another crunch, one step, then silence again. The pattern bothered me. Animals moved in bursts, in quick scurries and sudden stops. They didn't take one slow, deliberate step and then pause. That kind of movement was purposeful. That kind of movement was aware. I moved to the window again, careful not to disturb the curtain too much. I looked in the direction of the sound. Nothing. I waited 2 full minutes. Nothing moved. The gravel road stretched out in the moonlight, empty and pale. The trees stood still. The silence continued. I told myself I had imagined it. I went back to my seat. The knock came 45 minutes later. 3 slow knocks on the side door of the trailer. Not hard knocks, not frantic knocks, patient knocks. The kind of knocks someone gives when they aren't sure you're home and they don't want to disturb you, but they're going to stand there and wait regardless. My entire body went cold. I sat perfectly still for a moment, telling myself I had misheard, that it was a branch, that a pine cone had fallen on the roof, anything. Then came 3 more knocks, same rhythm, same patient, deliberate pace. I got up quietly and moved to the kitchen drawer where I kept a flashlight and my folding knife. I took both. I stood in the middle of the trailer and listened. Silence. "Hello?" I said, loud enough to be heard through the door, quiet enough not to wake Sandra. Nothing. "Who's there?" Nothing. I moved to the door and looked through the small window set in the upper half of it. The outside light was off, and all I could see was the pale wash of moonlight on the gravel and the dark shapes of the trees. There was no one standing at the door. The small area in front of the trailer steps was empty. I unlocked the door. I opened it 2 inches and looked out. No one. I opened it wider and leaned out, sweeping my flashlight beam left and right along the side of the trailer, then out toward the road. Nothing. I stepped down on the gravel step and looked around the back of the trailer. Empty. Just the forest. Just the dark. I stood there for a long moment, listening. The silence was absolute. Not a single sound. I looked at the gravel around the bottom of the steps. There were footprints. Not mine. I'd stepped straight out. These were already there, pressed in the soft gravel at the side of the door, facing the trailer. 2 distinct impressions, side by side. Someone had stood there. Someone had stood right there in front of my door in the dark and knocked. And now they were gone. I went back inside and locked the door. I locked the deadbolt and the chain. I sat on the couch with the knife open in my hand, and I did not sleep. Nothing else happened that night. No more knocks, no more footsteps, just that enormous, pressing silence that lasted until the sky began to lighten around 5 in the morning, and the birds finally, slowly came back. When Sandra woke up, I told her what had happened. She wanted to leave immediately, and I agreed. I didn't argue it. I didn't try to explain it away. As I was hooking up the truck to the trailer, I walked the perimeter of our campsite in the early morning light. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Evidence that someone had camped nearby, maybe tire tracks from another vehicle, something that would explain the knock. What I found, instead, stopped me cold. Along the far side of the trailer, the side facing the tree line, the opposite side from the door, there were marks on the metal. Long, thin scrape marks running horizontally across the aluminum siding, at about shoulder height. They were fresh. The bare metal gleamed in the morning light. Whatever was at my door, it had also been on the other side of the trailer. That meant it hadn't run away when I opened the door. It had simply walked around. It had circled my trailer in the dark while I was standing in the doorway with my flashlight, looking for it. It stayed close the whole time. We drove home that same day. I haven't been back to that stretch of forest road. Sandra doesn't ask me to explain it anymore. We just don't talk about mile marker 9. But here's the thing that still keeps me awake at night, 2 years later. The thing that lives at the back of my mind like a splinter I can't get to. When I opened that door and looked out and saw the footprints in the gravel, I swept my flashlight beam around the trailer, left, right, toward the road, back toward the trees, and for just a fraction of a second, at the very edge of my light's reach, right where the darkness began, I thought I saw something. A pale shape, the rough outline of a person standing very still between 2 trees. And I could have sworn it was facing me. I convinced myself it was a trick of the light, a pale tree trunk, my own frightened mind playing games with shadows. I've spent 2 years convincing myself of that. But sometimes, late at night, when the house gets quiet and my wife is asleep, I find myself thinking about how still that shape was, how perfectly patiently still, and how it didn't move when my flashlight found it. It just stood there, watching.
I've tried to write this down before. I've started it 6 or 7 times over the past 18 months and deleted it every time because putting the words on paper makes it more real. And I've been trying very hard to convince myself that what happened wasn't real. But it was. My name doesn't matter. I'll call myself Paul. I'm a long-haul trucker by trade, and I spend more time on the road than I do at home. A few years back, I started using my vacation weeks to do solo RV trips. It was the only way I knew how to decompress. More driving, more isolation, more open road. My therapist called it avoidant behavior. She was probably right, but it worked for me. In October of 2022, I took my Class C motorhome out to the hill country of West Texas for 10 days. I had a loose route planned, but nothing firm. I like to drive until a place felt right and then stop. No reservations, no schedules. I usually ended up in dispersed camping spots on BLM land or on the edge of state forest roads, where camping was technically permitted, but nobody ever actually did it. On the fourth night, I found a spot I loved immediately. A wide, flat clearing set back about 200 feet from the road, ringed on 3 sides by twisted mesquite and cedar, and open on the fourth side to a stunning west-facing view of rocky hills. I got there around 4 in the afternoon, which gave me plenty of time to set up and build a fire before dark. I was completely alone. I'd driven the road in for half a mile and hadn't seen a single other vehicle or person. The nearest town was 22 miles away. There was no cell service. I had a satellite communicator for emergencies, but I'd never needed to use it. I built my fire and cooked my dinner and sat in my folding chair and watched the sun go down over those hills, and I felt genuinely at peace. That's important to understand. I was calm that evening. I was not anxious. I was not imagining things. I was a 44-year-old man with 20-plus years of solo camping experience, and I was completely comfortable and content. I ate around 7. I cleaned up my dishes and stored my food properly. I kept the fire going because the October night was getting cool, and I liked having the light. I poured a cup of coffee and sat back down and opened the book I was reading. I'd been reading for maybe an hour when I got the feeling. If you spent time alone in wild places, you know the feeling I mean. It's not something you think, it's something you feel deep in your body, somewhere between your chest and your stomach, an old animal feeling. Something is here. You are being watched. I lowered my book and looked up slowly. I scanned the tree vine. The fire cast a circle of orange light that reached maybe 15 feet in every direction. Beyond that was pure darkness. The new moon was just a sliver, and the stars, brilliant as they were out there far from any city, gave almost no light at ground level. I saw nothing. I heard nothing. I told myself it was a deer. I went back to my book. The feeling got stronger. I set the book down and sat still and listened. The fire crackled quietly. The wind moved through the mesquite and made a soft, dry hissing. Far off, maybe a mile away, a coyote called once and went quiet. And then, between me and the tree line, something moved. I didn't see it so much as I perceived it, a change in the darkness, a slight shift in the way the shadows lay. There was a darker shape in the dark, and it was moving slowly at the very edge of the firelight, moving laterally from my right to my left. "Hello?" I said. The shape stopped. I reached into the pocket of my jacket and took out my flashlight. I clicked it on and pointed it at the spot where I had seen the movement. Nothing, just brush and shadows. I swept the beam slowly to the right, then back to the left. Nothing moved. There was no animal, no person, nothing. Just mesquite trees and bare, rocky ground. I left the flashlight on and set it on the arm of my chair, pointing outward, and went back to trying to read, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept drifting up from the page to the dark beyond the firelight. 20 minutes later, I heard breathing. That's the only word for it. A slow, steady sound that was just slightly too loud to be the wind and just slightly too rhythmic to be random. A low, wet breathing coming from somewhere to my left, outside the light. I picked up the flashlight again and stood up from my chair. "Hello, I can hear you. Who's there?" Nothing. I shone the light to my left, empty ground. I walked to the edge of the firelight and pushed the beam further into the dark, through the thin trunks of the mesquite. I saw something that made me take a step backward. On the ground, about 25 feet from me, there was a shape lying in the dirt, long and horizontal. My first thought was an animal, a deer maybe, lying down. I held the light on it and tried to make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't a deer. It was long and too thin and the wrong proportions. It was lying completely flat in the dirt, facing me. I could see what appeared to be a head at one end and long limbs folded close to a narrow body. It wasn't moving. It was just lying there in the beam of my flashlight on the bare, rocky ground, staring at me. I stood frozen for what felt like a very long time. Then it moved. Slowly, without urgency, the shape began to pull itself forward with its arms, dragging itself through the dirt toward me. No sound, except the soft scrape of movement through dry dirt and rock. I ran for my motorhome. I covered that 50 feet in seconds, yanked the door open, threw myself inside, and locked it. I went to every window and pulled every curtain. I killed the interior lights so nothing outside could see in. I sat on the floor between the driver's seat and the passenger seat with my back against the dash and my flashlight in one hand and my largest kitchen knife in the other, and I sat there in the dark and did not move. I heard it outside 30 seconds later, the soft scrape of movement across the dirt, circling the motorhome slowly. Then, silence. Then the sound of something pressing against the side of the vehicle, just not hard, just a gentle, steady pressure, like something leaning against it, testing it. I sat there for 3 hours. The sounds came and went, the pressure against the side came and went. Once, around midnight, something touched the door handle. I heard the click of it being tried from outside, just once. Then, nothing. At 2 in the morning, the sound stopped. I waited another hour before I moved. When I finally got into the driver's seat and started the engine, I turned on all the exterior lights the motorhome had and looked out at the clearing. Nothing. I drove out without looking back. I stopped at the first town I came to, a tiny place with a gas station and a diner, and I sat in the parking lot until the diner opened at 6 and I could go inside and sit around other people. I never went back to that area. I sold the motorhome 8 months later. I haven't camped since. I spent a long time trying to explain what I saw rationally. A person having a medical emergency, a drug user who had wandered off the road, someone who was hurt and couldn't stand up. I've thought about every logical explanation I can construct, but here's what I keep coming back to. When I turned my flashlight on that shape and it began to move toward me, I had the light full on it for several seconds. I've thought about those seconds thousands of times. It had no face. Where its face should have been, there was just a flat, pale surface, smooth, like something that never needed to see or hear or speak. I know what human beings look like in a flashlight beam, even at 25 feet, even in shadow. I've been in the dark enough to know. That was not human being.
My husband thinks I need to stop talking about this. He says it isn't healthy to keep going over it. He says some things happen that don't have explanations, and the best thing you can do is put them down and walk away. He's probably right. He's a practical man, and he loves me, and his advice comes from a good place. But he wasn't there. He was home with our kids while I drove to my mother's house in northern Michigan, and he didn't see what I saw. And he doesn't understand that some things don't go away just because you want them to. I'll start from the beginning. My name is Christine. I'm 41 years old, and my mother lives alone in a small house near Gaylord, Michigan. She's 72 and still sharp, still independent, but she's been having some health issues, and I try to get up there to visit her when I can. Last September, my husband had a work commitment that kept him home, and the kids were back in school, and I decided to take our small travel trailer up on my own and spend 5 days with Mom. I planned to drive up on a Friday, arriving at Mom's by mid-afternoon. The drive was about 4.5 hours on a normal day. I got a later start than I'd planned, stopped once for gas and once for coffee, and found myself on a quiet, 2-lane state road in the middle of the national forest at a little after 9 in the evening. Not dark yet. The sky still had a faint gray-blue glow in the west, but the forest on both sides of the road was already black and deep. I wasn't planning to stop.
I knew a good pull-off spot about 10 miles ahead where I'd parked before during previous trips, a wide, graveled area off the road with enough space for the trailer, and I figured I'd spend the night there and get to Mom's the next morning. I was tired from the drive and didn't want to arrive at her house at 10 at night and wake her up. I found the spot, pulled in, and got the trailer as level as I could. I didn't bother with a fire. I was tired enough that I just made tea, sat on the small couch, and read for an hour before turning in. Nothing unusual, nothing that felt strange or off. Just a woman alone in a quiet forest, planning to sleep and drive in the morning. I was asleep by 10:30. I woke up at 2:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone immediately after waking, the way I always do. I wasn't sure what had woken me. No sound I could identify, no sense of having had a nightmare. I just came awake suddenly, completely, and lay there in the dark wondering why. I lay still for a few minutes. The trailer was quiet, the forest outside the road was quiet. I could hear a very faint breeze in the trees. Nothing else. I was almost back to sleep when I saw the light. It came through the curtain on the small window beside the bed, a soft, pulsing light, yellowish white, that moved slowly from left to right and then vanished. My first thought was a car on the road, but the road was 100 feet away, and the light I'd seen was too close, too soft, moving too slowly to be headlights. It came back, moving right to left this time, slow and steady, like someone carrying a lantern. I sat up and edged the curtain aside and looked out. There was a woman in the road. She was standing in the middle of the two-lane road, maybe 60 feet from my trailer. She was facing me. She was holding something. I couldn't tell what, but it gave off that soft, yellowish light. She was completely still, and she was looking directly at the trailer. My chest tightened. I stared at her, waiting for her to move, to call out, to do something that would explain her presence. She just stood there, looking at me, or at the trailer. I couldn't be sure she could see me behind the curtain, but there was a quality to her stillness that felt intentional, like a person who has found what they were looking for and is simply waiting. I reached for my phone. No signal. I already knew there wouldn't be. I had a portable radio emergency device, but using it felt extreme. The woman was just standing there. Maybe she was lost. Maybe she needed help. Maybe her car had broken down somewhere on the road and she'd walked this way looking for someone. All of those things were possible. I pulled on my sweatshirt and shoes and went to the trailer door. I turned on the exterior step light and opened the door. "Hello?" I called across the distance. "Are you all right?" She turned her head. The movement was small and slow, and it made me think of someone who is very tired or very focused on something. She turned her head slightly, like she was considering my words. "Do you need help?" I said. She didn't answer. "Is there something wrong? Do you need me to call someone?" No answer. She was still looking at me, or in my direction. The light she was holding cast a glow on the lower part of her face, but not her eyes, and I realized I couldn't see her eyes at all. Just her chin, her jaw, the lower curve of her cheeks. The upper half of her face was in shadow. Something told me to go back inside. It wasn't a dramatic feeling. It was quiet and simple and clear, the way the most important feelings often are. Just a gentle but firm internal voice that said, "Go inside and lock the door." I listened to it. I stepped back inside, closed the door, and locked it. I went to the window and looked out again. She had moved. She was closer now, maybe 30 feet from the trailer. I hadn't heard any footsteps. I hadn't taken my eyes off her for more than 2 or 3 seconds, just the time it took me to close and lock the door. But she was closer. I watched her. She was standing completely still again, her face still tilted slightly toward the trailer.
The light she was holding, it looked like a small lantern now, an old-fashioned one, the kind with a candle inside, swayed just slightly with a movement I couldn't explain because she wasn't moving. I sat at that window for a very long time. She didn't come any closer, she didn't call out, she didn't move. She stood there in the road in the middle of the night with her old lantern and her hidden eyes, and she waited. I don't know what she was waiting for. Around 4 in the morning, the sky in the east began its first shift from black to very dark blue. I'd been watching her for well over an hour, dozing upright once or twice and jerking back awake. When the sky began to lighten, I looked out and she was still there. And then, between one moment and the next, she was gone. I didn't see her leave. I didn't blink or look away. As far as I could tell, she simply ceased to be standing there. In the morning light, I could see the road clearly, empty in both directions. No car parked anywhere, no sign that anyone had been on that road in the night. I looked at the gravel at the edge of the road where she'd been standing. No footprints, nothing disturbed. I drove to my mother's house without stopping. I sat at her kitchen table and drank coffee and eventually told her what had happened. My mother is a practical woman, not given to ghost stories or supernatural thinking. She listened to my whole account in silence. Then she got up from the table and went to her bookshelf and came back with a thick binder full of newspaper clippings and printouts she'd collected over years. She was a local history buff, always researching the area. She found what she was looking for and laid a yellowed newspaper clipping in front of me. It was from 1987, a small article, 6 paragraphs, about a woman who'd been hit and killed by a car on that stretch of state road in the middle of the night. She'd been walking in the road. The driver hadn't seen her until it was too late. The article said she'd been returning home on foot after her car had broken down somewhere miles back. She'd been carrying a lantern. Mom looked at me across the table. "People around here know not to stop on that stretch of road at night," she said quietly. "I'm sorry, I should have told you." I stared at the clipping, at the date, at the description of the lantern. "What happens?" I said slowly. "What happens to the people who do stop?" My mother was quiet for a moment. She said, "They open the door. That's all I know. The ones it's happened to, the ones who talked about it after, they all said the same thing. It's fine if you don't open the door, but if you open the door..." She stopped. What happens?" I asked. "What happens if you open the door?" She put her hand over mine. "I don't know," she said. "Nobody who's opened the door has been able to say."
I've told this story to 3 people in my life. 2 of them stopped speaking to me after. Not because they didn't believe me. I think because they did believe me, and it frightened them. And it was easier to just quietly exit my life than to sit with that kind of fear. The 3rd person, my brother, heard the whole thing and then said, quietly, "You should have left when the dog stopped barking." He was right. I should have. My name is Thomas Wilder. I'm 53 years old. I retired early from a career in IT and bought a large 5th-wheel trailer and a new pickup truck, and I spent the better part of a year traveling the western United States with my German Shepherd, Rex. Rex was 7 years old, 75 pounds, and fearless. He'd grown up with me in apartments and houses, and he adapted to the road life with the easy confidence of a dog who trusts his person completely. He slept on the bed, he rode in the truck, he barked at things he didn't like and ignored things he'd decided weren't worth his time. In the spring of what I now think of as the last good year, we were traveling through the high desert of southern Oregon. I'd found a campground on a national forest map, a small primitive loop with 12 sites, accessible by a dirt road that dropped down off the main highway and wound through a canyon for about 3 miles before reaching the sites. The map showed a river nearby, a few hiking trails,
a host site with a vault toilet. What the map didn't show was that the campground had been mostly decommissioned. When I got there in late afternoon, I found that 10 of the 12 sites were clearly marked with wooden posts bearing brown signs that said "closed" and were strung with orange barrier tape. The host site was empty. No host, no vehicle, nothing but an empty gravel pad where someone had once parked a trailer. The vault toilet was still functional. 2 sites were open. Site 1 near the entrance and Site 12 at the far end of the loop where the road dead-ended against a rocky hillside. I took Site 12. I always preferred the last site on a loop, more privacy, less traffic. Rex jumped out of the truck and immediately began quartering the area, nose down, tail up, doing his survey of our new home. Normal behavior, happy dog, good sign. I set up in about 40 minutes, made dinner. The sun dropped behind the canyon walls early, and by 7 the light was already fading to a deep purple dusk. The river made a constant soft rushing sound from somewhere below and to the east, invisible in the trees. A woodpecker hammered at a dead snag somewhere nearby. Rex settled down at the base of the trailer steps and chewed on a stick. It was a quiet, beautiful evening. I felt good about the spot. Around 9, Rex suddenly stood up. I noticed because he did it without warning. He went from lying relaxed to standing stiff in about 1 second. His ears went forward, his tail dropped to horizontal. He was facing the back of the site, toward the rocky hillside where the road dead-ended. "What is it, buddy?" I said. He didn't look at me. He didn't make a sound. He just stood there, staring at the hillside. Rex barked at coyotes, at deer, at the sound of other campers laughing half a mile away. I'd seen him raise a fuss over a plastic bag caught in a bush. He was not a quiet dog when something bothered him. He didn't bark. He stood perfectly still and stared. I looked at the hillside. In the deepening dark, I could see the rough shapes of the rocks and the dark mouths of a few shallow gullies cut into the stone face, some scrubby brush, a few stunted juniper trees. Nothing moved. I watched for a few minutes. Rex didn't relax. He shifted his weight forward slightly, not an aggressive movement, more like something pulling his attention harder. "Okay," I said, "let's go inside." Rex didn't move when I opened the trailer door. I had to call him twice. He came in reluctantly, and I closed and locked the door behind us. Inside, Rex went to the window that faced the hillside and sat in front of it, staring out. His ears stayed forward. His body stayed tense. For an hour, he sat there, not making a sound, just watching. I watched too, from my seat at the dinette table, where I had a similar angle on that window. I saw nothing. The hillside sat under the stars, dark and still. Nothing moved. Nothing. Around 10:30, Rex lay down. His ears relaxed. His body softened. He exhaled a long breath and put his head on his paws. I waited another 20 minutes, and then, carefully, I turned off the lights and went to bed. I woke at 1:15. I know the time exactly. Rex was not on the bed. That was the first thing I registered, the absence of the warm, heavy weight that was always there by my feet. I lay still and listened. Silence, except for the river and something else. A very faint, low sound somewhere below the register of hearing, but somehow still perceived. Not a sound exactly, a vibration, something my body felt before my ears did. A low, rhythmic pulse, as if something far larger than anything I could imagine was breathing just outside. I got up and found Rex at the window again, same position as before, same rigid posture, same forward ears, but this time he was trembling. Rex did not tremble. In 7 years I had never seen that dog tremble. I put my hand on his back. He didn't acknowledge me. He was locked on to whatever was out there. I looked through the window. At first, I thought I was seeing the hillside differently in the dark. that the shapes of the rocks had a different quality at 1 in the morning than they did at 10 o'clock. But then I understood that what I was seeing wasn't the rocks at all. Something was standing against the hillside. It was huge. That was the first thing my mind processed, and it processed it the way the brain deals with something outside its categories, slowly, almost unwillingly. It was tall, taller than the trailer by at least double. It was dark, a different quality of dark than the rocks around it, and it was roughly the shape of a person if that person had been stretched and narrowed and made wrong in ways I couldn't precisely identify. It was standing, perfectly still. And it was close, 50 feet, maybe less. My hand was still on Rex's back. I could feel his entire body shaking. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The thing was still. No part of it moved, but there was something about it that suggested awareness, the sense that it knew exactly where I was, exactly what I was doing, exactly how frightened I was, the way a patient thing knows, the way something knows when it has all the time in the world. I don't know how long I stood there. It might have been 5 minutes. It might have been 20. Time stopped behaving normally. Then the thing moved. It was a slight movement, a slow lean, barely perceptible, a shift of weight from one side to the other, the kind of movement a person makes when they've been standing for a long time and they're adjusting their balance. That single, casual, almost bored movement broke something open in me. I grabbed Rex's collar and moved away from the window. I put on shoes and a jacket. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, my phone, my emergency device. I put the leash on Rex, and I left Rex in the truck cab before I let myself think about how exposed I was, how close that thing was, how completely alone on the end of this dead-end loop road in a closed campground in the dark. I started the truck. I turned on the headlights. The hillside was empty. I drove out. I didn't look back. I drove the 3 miles of dirt road and then the 10 miles to the nearest town, and I sat in a 24-hour truck stop parking lot until the sun came up. What I've told you is every detail I remember, and I've remembered it every day since. But there are 2 things I haven't mentioned yet, and they're the 2 things I least know what to do with. The first, in the morning light, before I drove out, I had stopped to look at the pull-off area beside the trailer before I left. I hadn't expected to see anything. I'd convinced myself there was nothing there, that it was shadows and fear and an overactive imagination. There were marks in the dirt at the base of the hillside, indentations, spaced widely apart. The pattern was wrong for any animal I know, too wide, the pattern too strange. But the shape of each indentation pressed into the dirt was clear. They were footprints. The second thing, when I checked my satellite emergency communicator that morning in the truck stop lot, I saw that it had logged an attempted message transmission at 1:22 in the morning. I had not touched that device. It had been in my jacket pocket the entire night. Whatever the message was, it hadn't gone through. The device showed a failed transmission, signal interrupted. But the transmission had been attempted from my device. I have never figured out how. Rex lived 3 more good years after that trip. He was never quite the same at night. He startled more easily. He was slower to settle. He pressed closer to me in the dark than he ever had before. He was still a good dog, the best dog, but he never liked to look out windows after dark, and neither do I anymore.